bowling ball going back and forth in a line from you to me.
There's one thing I do want to bring up before I get into the other part of your quote here. There has been some back and forth, some controversy over the film, the Super 8 film that you mentioned. That was actually taken by an IBM contractor to NASA at the time, and he had nothing to lose or gain by putting that film out, because he was a staunch supporter of the Apollo missions, obviously because he was on contract working on the program. There has been some controversy over the film itself, whether it's been altered or edited. But so far, as I understand, the authors of that film have stood by their work.
Yeah.
And to this day, they still stand by their work. So as far as I'm concerned, that film stands up. And that film isn't the only validation. There's much other work that was done on the F1 engines, and this is what we're going to lead into now. The other second Russian scientist by the name of Gennady Ovchenkov. And I'll just read your quote here because it is a very interesting quote from the article. But just reading your quote to start with, and this is again on page 30 on the bottom.
Yeah.
The second paragraph, third paragraph. So this paper, also from Ollis.com by Gennady Ovchenkov, analyzes the heat transfer and strength of the tubular cooling jacket of the Saturn V engines. The author also concludes that the rocket could not have achieved the claimed Apollo missions, as he states, and this is a direct quote from the author of that article. The pressure in the F1 combustion chamber is likely to have been significantly lower than that stated, due to the fundamental shortcomings of the tubular cooling system of American rocket engines. This is further confirmed by the fact that all rocket engines now being developed and currently in use, including those in the United States, use the Soviet-style cooling system. Consequently, the launch weight of the Saturn V was lower and accordingly could not have ensured the accomplishment of the Apollo moon landing program. Now, I want to just emphasize one very telling point here. And we're talking about the F1 engines. The F1 engines were liquid fueled. Okay, so it used propellant. These were not solid fueled. These were liquid fueled engines, and it had a very unique cooling system that for its time. And he's talking about the cooling system breaking down. But Marcus, what he says here is something that I would like you to elaborate. And I want to just read that quote from him again, that one line. He said this, in terms of talking about the cooling system, he says, this is further confirmed by the fact that all rocket engines now being developed and currently in use, including those in the United States, use the Soviet-style cooling system. Now, we're told that the cooling system in this F1 engine, this all-powerful F1 engine, the most powerful liquid fuel engine ever built, is no longer being used. The Americans themselves have referred back to fallen back to the Soviet-style cooling system. That's a very telling statement right there.
It is indeed, because the F1 engines were alleged to produce 1.5 million pounds of thrust. That's a huge amount. That's 600 tons of thrust, a vast amount of energy. And it's called the Saturn V because it had 5 of these engines, 5 Saturn V, so 5 engines.
Yep.
Now, since then, this is mid-1960s, late 1960s, when those engines were being developed, originally for the US Air Force, for their rockets, and they were taken over by Rocketdyne, who manufactured them. But since then, no rocket engine, to my knowledge, has exceeded much more than about 200,000 pounds of thrust.
That's right.
Look at Elon Musk's latest Star. What's it called? The big one, where he's going to land on the moon with it.
Oh, Starliner or something, or is that?
Yeah,
something like that. I haven't been following it, but I think it's something of that nature.
Now that uses 32 engines. of 200,000 pound thrust each to produce the 8 million pounds of thrust that they presumably need to have to launch the weight that they're going to have.
Yeah.
So if it was possible to make an engine that would be as powerful as the F1 engine at 1.5 million pounds of thrust, they could have many fewer engines. But the interesting point that with Musk's launch, which I think it's failed 4 times so far, hasn't even got into orbit yet.
Yeah.
The interesting point with that is that the Soviets were using multi-engined rockets on their N1 launcher, which was basically the equivalent of the Saturn V rocket. But they used over 30 engines, and the thing kept blowing up. They had 4 launches and 4 destroyed.
Yes.
And it was only through the use of satellite reconnaissance that Americans discovered that they had blown up, because they found a wrecked launch site when they overflew it with their hexagon spy satellites, taking photographs of it in the late 1960s. Or maybe it was the SR-71 which overflew it. Though Americans always claimed they're very careful not to invade foreign territory, or enemy territory, as it was referred to then. So they had side scanning radars and side viewing cameras which could look sideways. But this launch site is in Baikonur in Kazakhstan, quite a long way inland. So it was probably taken from a satellite, or maybe a U-2 plane before they got shot down. So you've got this sort of dichotomy between the Soviets using multi-engine rockets and the Americans trying to use small number of rockets with vast power and thrust. Elon Musk now using multi-engine rockets, which there are a lot of problems with.
Yeah.
So maybe there is something. Russian rocket engines are really quite reliable in many cases now. The RD-180 specifically, that was ordered, 60 of them were ordered by NASA to use on their rockets, because they were the most reliable engine they could find. I'm not sure what the details of the Russian cooling system is, in terms of how that differs from the F1 engine, which had its cooling system in the skirt of the engine. They put the fuel down to cool the exhaust. I'm not quite sure how that worked in relation to what the Russians now use.
Yeah, the cooling system was I think is what this Russian scientist really focused on. He was able to determine from and analyzing the launch of Apollo 6, the unmanned launch of Apollo 6, which was the second Saturn V. He observed kerosene was burning on the outside. So that's what that big flame was. And his premise is that the cooling system, which was hundreds of small tubes that came down outside the combustion chamber. Yeah. So when the propellant was fed into the fuel injector, 70% of the fuel would go down those small tubes on the outside of the combustion chamber, while 30% went into the combustion chamber. And when the controlled explosion happened, to keep the temperatures level, the small tubes on the outside acted as a cooling system. So it absorbed the thermal energy that was produced from inside the combustion chamber. And then that fuel propellant was rerouted towards the combustion chamber. So that what they were saying is that it was, an efficient cooling system, because they didn't expend any fuel. They didn't use any fuel. They just used that fuel. They just kind of went around it and then diverted that fuel into the combustion chamber, the other 70%. But I find it very interesting what you just made. You made a very interesting comment here, that the Soviets back then with the M1 rocket and Elon Musk now are using multiple engines to get the power output that they basically duplicated with the Saturn V. And I'm wondering if the question being, because you made me think of a question here, is there a limit to the size of, and just one more point I want to make about the combustion chamber. The cooling system itself was breaking down. That's what this Russian scientist was getting at. So the tubes were cracking and it was spewing propellant, kerosene, and that was causing the big flame, the burn. And that's what he was getting at, and that's why the engine became unstable, because it started, the combustion chamber itself started to fluctuate because it was getting too hot and it was nearing an explosion. So that's what he was getting at, is the breakdown of the American cooling system with the Saturn V F1 engines. But Marcus, it really raises the question, which you just reminded me of. Is there a limit? Is that why the Russians were using so many engines per rocket, the same with Elon Musk? Because they know they can't get 1.5 million pounds per thrust from one engine. They have to use multiple engines to get the final output that they want. I'm wondering if that's really what's going on here, and why the F1 engines were discontinued in 1975.
Yeah, no, I think that's the case, because it's a question I had many years ago, when they were talking about the shuttle and launching the shuttle, space shuttle.
Yeah.
So why don't they use a Saturn V rocket to launch the space shuttle? They're quite easy to launch it. It's only going up into Earth orbit. But they had a completely new system with solid fuel boosters. It's almost as if they couldn't rely on the F1 engines. I mean, they could just use a couple of them. That would be enough to get the space shuttle up into orbit.
Yeah.
I mean, the space shuttle is not going to the moon. It's just going about 100 miles up.
That's right. And I think it would have, with using two or three engines, F1 engines would produce the equivalent amount of thrust that the space shuttle was using, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't got all specs on that, but that's kind of a roundabout. Yeah. Very good question. Why weren't they using the F1 engines? And that's the question that's never been asked and answered by the proponents.
No, never has. Never has.
No.
It's a completely new thing, because the space shuttle, by the way, was designed to be the size and shape it was in order so it could launch the Hexagon spy satellite, the KH-9. Exactly. And there are pictures of the spy satellite, the Hexagon spy satellite, in a space shuttle. That's how it was launched.
Marcus, I would like to close on the next point here, because I know we did talk a lot about this in the previous video. We talked a lot about Apollo 13, but I have one point here that I would like to read, because it gets into another aspect of this, and I think the viewers will pick up on this when I read it to you. So it's on. So we're in now chapter, I believe it's chapter 4.
Yeah, chapter 4.
And it's page 38.
The lost Apollo 13 capsule.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I got specifically here the paragraph, the second one down, the inference that. So I'm going to read that paragraph, because there's a couple of interesting things in this paragraph that inspired me when I was writing my third book. So again, so here we go. I'll read the quote out loud, and then we can finish off with this, because this is a good way to finish off this particular segment here. The inference that this may well have been the Apollo 13 capsule jettisoned after launch could have had some merit. As Marcus Allen clearly shows, the astronauts did have a way to escape the launch tower by a slide into a safe from a safe room located below the launch pad, and this possibility must be plausible. If the mission was to be a staged event, then why risk the lives of the astronauts? It would be enough for the press and the public to see the astronauts enter the launch tower complex. What happens after is not observed by anyone. And that is really something that I wanted to talk about briefly before we wrap up. That has two possibilities there. So there's the second Apollo 13 capsule that mysteriously turned up, and we talked about that extensively. But this leads into something else in that paragraph. How did the astronauts, escape from the Saturn V when everybody had pulled back, getting ready for the launch, including the media? And I use that to write a fictional account that a lot of people don't realize this, but there was an escape system built into that launch system. So if anything supposedly had gone wrong, and they wouldn't have been able to get out of the rocket on time, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. If anything went wrong, and the astronauts would leave the capsule themselves because nobody else would be there, they would make a, excuse me, a dash for the emergency chute, which would take them down from the top of the Saturn V, the emergency chute, all the way down to underground bunker. I think it was about 40 feet underground, reinforced, right? Yeah. It could withstand almost withstand a direct hit of a conventional weapon. And it was reinforced with in the bunker. And there's a video on this online about that. There is, yeah. And they would have enough provisions for several days. If there supposedly if anything went wrong with the rocket and it was, you know, it was chaos because of the explosion, they would have enough provisions for 7 days to maintain themselves while they worked to get the astronauts out. Well, that's a very good scenario for the astronauts not even being launched, is to with any of the missions, but specifically we're talking about Apollo 13 here, is that just before the launch, the astronauts were actually underground. They had escaped. They went there for the cameras. And once the cameras had pulled back and out of the way, because they were miles back by this time, nobody could see them escaping. Nobody can see them walking to the chute. It was out of it was behind and out of range of the cameras anyway. So their escape system, they could easily escape from the Saturn V before it supposedly launched. They can escape from the Saturn V and dash down to the underground bunker and just stay there for about a day or so until things calm down.
Yeah,
that's a pretty good scenario as to how they actually did it.
Yeah, so interesting. That is also the premise behind the film Capricorn 1. They knew that the rocket was going to get into serious trouble, mainly on its re-entry. So they got the astronauts off. This is a Capricorn 1. Got the astronauts off, launched the rocket, and then got the astronauts to do what they would have done during the voyages, going to Mars, we're told. What they were talking to the families and making reports and generally behaving as if they were on their mission. But then when the rocket comes back to Earth, it's destroyed because they knew it was going to have a real problem on re-entry. The rocket is destroyed. But now there's another problem. There's 3 live astronauts who are supposed to be dead. What do you do with them?
Yeah. And
that's the second part of the film, and Telly Savalas comes along and rescues them in his plane, and it's all exciting.
That's a good scene.
And they appear at their own funerals.
Yeah.
In front of the
he shows up. Yeah.
Oh, what's going on? What's going on? And,
yeah.
Yeah.
That famous scene when James Brolin was running, you know, when he still had his spacesuit on and he was running, and his wife turns around, she's at his funeral, but then she sees her husband running. And yeah, there was such a very, I mean, you can't help but think of the Apollo moon missions when that was going on. And it's interesting that you brought up that part, because I wrote, well, what if the missions, what if the mission, there was a catastrophic failure on one of the launches? How would the astronauts would have to go into hiding for the rest of their lives? No, because they built into that whole scenario that they would come up with a way to say, we rescued the astronauts. The tower escape system on top of the command module worked really well, and we picked them up in the water. They're safe. So, because try getting an astronaut to sign up for this, knowing that if the rocket explodes, then they basically have to disappear for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, they would.
Right. Anyway, Marcus, really enjoyed this series. This is part 2 now.
Yeah, part.
And actually, for the folks out there, I'm going to be posting this video in probably 2 or 3 parts. So don't be misled by, you know, it's part 1, part 2, because I say this is part 2, but I'll number it accordingly to how I post the videos. So just to let the viewer know that. So yeah, this is part 2 because this is the second time we got together, but I usually post in 3 parts. So if we do about a 2-hour video, I'll post maybe 3 videos at a time. So
Yeah.
just so there's no confusion with the viewer. But anyway, Marcus,
Yeah.
I look forward to picking up where we left off.
Well, we're doing well. We're getting there.
Yeah.
I think we're covering it in considerable detail, which is great.
Yeah, and we've covered 4 chapters.
That's the book available on Amazon.
Amazon, and it's I notice your reviews are picking up very well on Amazon. I've noticed that.
Yeah.
So it's really, folks, I do highly recommend the book by Marcus Allen and Trevor Weaver. I've been in contact with Trevor Weaver too. We chatted, of course, a few times. Very nice man.
Yeah,
Very knowledgeable, and the book has a lot of very detailed information. What I like about the book, Marcus, is that you really get into the technical aspect of it. You and Trevor, you really get into the technical aspect of it, and you explain a lot. It's really, if I could say this, you've really done the heavy lifting for a lot of people here. They don't have to, open up the manuals. You've actually put it in here, right? And so if you want, it covers a lot of aspects of the Apollo missions, of the Apollo moon mission hoax, rather. And there's really, it's a mini encyclopedia, if I can put it that way, in terms of, because you go through it step by step in terms of the technology, and you clearly show that it just would not have worked.
No, it wouldn't.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. There's just final point. The book has got 29 chapters. We cover 29 different areas, and just take one at random, and we've covered a couple this time at the beginning. But there are things like the fake Apollo suns. That's an interesting one. And the waving flags. We cover that. The moon rocks and the retroreflectors. Film in space. Now that's a good one.
Yeah.
And anybody who's interested, obviously there are a lot of references available, and obviously they can't all be put into the book. So they're on a website. And if you go to the website, let me just get it, tinyurl.com, tinyurl.com/Moon Skeptics. Moon Skeptics is spelt the English way with a C, SCEPTICS. Moon Skeptics, one word. And that gives you, take you to a website, and each chapter has various references. There are 246 references altogether, and they're all visual. You can see, some of them are quite long, some of them are quite short. But if you want to dig into the detail of where we got the information from and how we've assembled it, the book is basically a digest of that reference, or those references, 246 references. So there's quite a lot there. It'll take you several weeks to cover them because there are films, but it's all there, and including the most famous film of them all, American Moon by Massimo Mazzucca, and also Make Believe, Smoke and Mirrors, how it was all done. So
can you send me the link? And I'll post it on the videos that we do on the book series here. If you could send me that link, and I'll happily post it for each video.
that'd be great.
And I'm going to be posting this video on YouTube and BitChute as well. So, and I've opened up a Rumble account, so I'll probably be posting on a Rumble too.
Good.
So yeah. So if you could send me that link, and I'll make sure that I put it in the description below.
Yeah, I'll do that, because that would that helps people. If you're interested, people are interested in looking into a little bit more detail.
Yeah,
you can get the overall picture by reading the book, and that just covers the 29 areas that we look at. If you want to get into the detail of where that information comes from, they Randy will publish on there, but it's tinyurl.com/Moon Skeptics. And because we're British, we spell it the British way. So don't confuse it with the SK skeptic. It's SC. That's the British way. So yeah, no, it's great.
Thank you. Oh, you're welcome, Marcus. I really appreciate having you on, and I do really love this series. So I'm looking forward to our next one. And for all the viewers out there watching, thank you. And thank you for your comments. I really do appreciate them. I do try to read most of them. And I just want to make a point about the comment section. People are welcome to post comments on here. You don't have to agree with me, but you do have to follow some basic rules. No abuse, please. All right. When I see abuse, then I'm going to delete the comments. And if it continues, I'm going to block you. So you're welcome to come on there, present your arguments, present them in a civilized way. And I always leave those comments on there. As I said many times, I'm not asking people to agree with me. Do your own research and come on my channel. We can have a discussion. And if you're interested too, I do not mind having a discussion on video as long as you agree to a moderator. I want to thank Justin Cox for doing just that. We had a very good discussion. So if anyone else wants to have a discussion, just let me know, but you have to agree to a moderator. But anyway, Marcus, again, thank you for joining me today in this video. I look forward to our next one. And then to all the viewers out there, thank you for watching, and we will see you again soon.
That's good.
Bye for now.
Thank you, Randy.